I'm sorry, I know many people hate it, but the jump cut is here to stay, and this is why. So I'm personally a bit happy about doing this video because it gives me a textual excuse to go back to jump cuts for a video. This video is part of a follow-up to two other videos, the first being an outline of the basic language of film editing, basic cuts, where jump cuts were mentioned and demonstrated, and many people in the comments suggested a deeper dive into the specific uses and aesthetic of the jump cut. Then as well, this is a follow-up to last week's video on the dialect of vlogging, and specifically points made in that video about how the use of jump cuts has spread to YouTube as a whole, has become ingrained in the basic visual language of the medium. In that video, I asked people what they think YouTube will look like in 10 years, and people, including Crown Prince of Vloggerdom Hank Green, generally agreed that the jump cut would remain eternal. And I agree. Now, I have made use of the jump cut before, and not just in the way that I will occasionally let one slide because it's going to be too much of a hassle to cut around. When I first moved to the current channel following the shutdown of blip.tv, I chose to adopt a fairly conventional YouTube tone, both to feel it out for myself, as I've always been of a mind to tinker with how I structure the channel, and to blend in with the locals, as it were. So I have some experience with jump cuts as both an aesthetic and as a workflow. And that's how we're going to break this up. Two broad categories speaking to why the jump cut is here to stay. The first being the semantic and aesthetic reasons, the second being the pragmatic. And I'm going to start this off by outright praising what I see as the unique semantic strength of the jump cut, and that is its high degree of semiotic flexibility. I'm actually a big fan of the teleporting jump cut, and for a while I explicitly used a right to left teleport to indicate parenthetic statements. This was something I more or less lifted directly from Zay Frank, Hank Green, and Nice Peter because it is a very effective form of visual punctuation, with different areas of the set and the frame used to indicate different types of statements. It also really helps to break up long, complex ideas into smaller, more manageable bites. This can serve to properly differentiate a joke from a serious statement by moving either very far from or very close to the camera, or going back to my own example, it can create an aside by literally moving aside. This all has a direct narrative value in helping better communicate meaning, which is great when you're trying to get across a complex idea or unambiguously indicate that something is a joke. Now, many of these techniques, like dramatically changing framing for emphasis, can be replicated with conventional cutting. This gag with Brock Mansley, where I keep zooming closer and closer for comedic effect, has the same root idea, which is replicating a sense of unease and invasion of personal space that would come along with physically moving myself closer to the camera. However, there's a specific device that can only be achieved by using jump cuts, and that is the use of the set as a stage. When a performer opts to set their camera and leave the framing unchanged, the resulting video takes on more of the characteristics of theater, where specific locations within the stage take on meanings that aren't properly replicated purely by position within the frame. While a close-up works to create a psychological sense of closeness, that effect is amplified if it's cast against a fixed canvas that more directly communicates the speaker moving physically closer to the camera and, by proxy, the viewer. All of the meanings of depth are made more potent by giving more meaning to near and far. Likewise, moving to the left to indicate an aside is more potent the more meaning left has. If left is a physical characteristic of the space rather than simply an implication created by the movement of the camera. To put another way, stage left is more meaningful than frame left. What this translates into is that the jump cut style allows for a degree of intimacy that other editing styles can't quite replicate by virtue of how it creates a stage rather than just a frame. This ability to set a stage and in that stage create a replica of the intimacy of theater is, I think, a unique strength of the style. I wanted to emphasize this first because I do think it's important to defend the aesthetic value of the jump cut rather than just saying, well, it solves a bunch of pragmatic problems. Speaking of that, Jump cuts solve so many pragmatic problems, it's not even funny. For the current iteration of the channel, I use close-ups to cover edits and to create emphasis. I am almost always on screen because lip reading is a fundamental pedagogical tool. Many people can absorb information better or faster when they are watching a face say it rather than just hearing it. And it minimizes my conflicts with copyright robots by minimizing how much copyright content I need to use on screen. However, this in turn means that everything needs to be recorded on camera, and because I have a personal desire to make my image quality as good as I can as a small way of standing out from the crowd, I don't want to make close-ups by just zooming in. Like, look at this. Look at the drop in clarity. That's better. This all means that every video is recorded twice, at minimum, all the way through in order to get all the footage that's going to be needed to weave everything together, which straight up doubles my record time. Now, that's me. That's my process. Is it worth it? Maybe? There is, however, no question that using jump cuts instead dramatically simplifies the process. And that's for me in an environment where I have the control, where I can record things multiple times and I can change the camera configuration. The jump cut simply gets more valuable the less control the creator has, or the more chaotic their environment. For people who use real environments, again, that's real with a capital R as opposed to a poised environment like a studio or set, there simply isn't another practical solution for the vast majority of creators. The number of YouTubers running around with a small crew who could even afford to have 2 cameras running as they run around to make their stuff is at most a few dozen. And even then, it wouldn't necessarily serve their aesthetic needs. At the end of the day, single camera confessional style is cheap and fast. And that's not a bad thing, because it still takes skill and thought to do cheap and fast well. It's easier to use the space as a stage or to use your environment as a canvas than it is to fuss around with multiple camera setups and all of the extra gear and hassle that goes along with it. But it still takes forethought and creativity to use those mechanisms well, to find a good canvas, to know how and when to use your stage to punctuate your points. But that skill and forethought is all something that you can learn as someone running around on their own with a camera. You don't need 8 other people on your team to figure out how to do it and how to do it well. So with all that, I think that no matter how many people post in the comments about the YouTube style and the jump cut and how much they hate it, the jump cut is here to stay.